I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. Let me ask you a question right off the bat. When life hits you hard, hard enough to knock the breath out of your spirit, where do you turn? Think about that for a moment. Take a breath, close your eyes if you need to, and consider the times when you've been on your knees, overwhelmed, afraid, uncertain if you can keep going. We've all had those moments, haven't we? Moments when you feel alone, burdened by the weight of your struggles, desperate for any sign that you're not fighting this battle by yourself. I can recall the first time I truly felt that desperation. I was young, trying to find my footing, thinking I had this world figured out. But then a series of obstacles came barreling into my life. Family challenges, career uncertainties, all jumbled up with my own insecurity. I remember the feeling of helplessness, the sense that no matter how tough I tried to appear, my personal strength just wasn't enough. And in the middle of that despair, I heard this quiet, persistent voice inside that said, "Trust me." It was calm, steady, and it felt like the voice of God Himself, calling me to lean on Him, to discover a different kind of strength. Now, I know not everyone in this room shares the exact same background or the same spiritual framework, but I want you to stay with me today, because we're talking about something that touches all of us, regardless of our story, our culture, or our upbringing. We're talking about a different definition of strength. It's the type of strength that has everything to do with humility, reliance, and understanding that real power doesn't always come from your own hustle or your own muscle. Sometimes real power shows up when you acknowledge you need someone beyond yourself, someone bigger, stronger, and wiser than you. That's why I'm here, and that's why I believe you're here too. Maybe you've sensed in your heart that your best efforts on your own leave you feeling drained, anxious, maybe even hopeless. Or maybe you've been succeeding by the world's standards, but there's still this hole in your chest that nothing can seem to fill. Let me tell you something. That emptiness often signals a deeper need for God, a place in your soul that only divine care can satisfy. I remember talking to my mother many years ago. She'd say to me, "Denzel, if you ever get too big for God, that's when you've lost your way." Now, my mother was a wise woman, humble yet fearless when it came to her faith. She didn't mind telling me exactly what I needed to hear, even if it stung a bit. And I can't help but laugh sometimes because I see glimpses of myself in that memory. The younger version of me who thought he was strong, thought he could handle anything just by grit and determination. But time is a way of teaching you lessons no lecture ever could. Life will humble you, and in that humility you come face to face with your limitations. That's when you discover how vital it is to have someone unwavering to lean on. For me, that someone has always been God, His Word, His promises, His presence. In my toughest hours, when I was broke or broken, the quiet knowledge that I wasn't abandoned became the turning point. And that's the heart of what I want to share with you today, discovering real strength through intimate dependence on God's faithful care. Maybe you're a single parent trying to manage bills, discipline, day-to-day responsibilities without a partner to shoulder the burden. Maybe you're a teenager feeling invisible in your own home, convinced that nobody understands what you're going through. Maybe you're a business leader, an entrepreneur, carrying the stress of payroll, deadlines, expectations, unsure if you can keep your organization afloat another quarter. Maybe you're just someone who wakes up and wonders if there's more to this life than the repetitive grind, day in and day out. Whatever your story, I want you to know there is a place of shelter, a source of strength, far beyond what you can muster on your own. It's not just about believing there's a higher power. It's about leaning into that presence daily, intimately, in every decision, every fear, every aspiration. The challenge we're faced with is as old as humanity itself. Where do we find lasting courage, resilience, and hope when everything around us keeps shifting, when people disappoint us, when finances get shaky, or when our health betrays us? Society will sell you 1,000 different answers. Work harder, they say. Build a tougher exterior. Don't let anyone see you sweat. Others will tell you it's all about you, your brand, your image, your hustle. But from my own journey, and from the countless individuals I've encountered, I've witnessed that no matter how successful, talented, or driven you are, there will come a time when your strength alone just isn't enough. That moment can be terrifying, or it can be the start of a profound transformation, a transformation that begins when we trust in something more steadfast than ourselves. So as we gather here, let's be open to the possibility that the solution we've been frantically searching for is already within reach. Let's dare to put aside our pride, our busyness, our distractions, and take a fresh, honest look at what it means to draw strength from the very one who fashioned our soul. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's walk this journey together, and by the end of it, my prayer is that you'll have not just heard words, but experienced a shift deep within your heart. Because real strength isn't about a show of force or a public display of swagger. It's about intimate dependence on God's faithful care. The kind of dependence that unlocks peace, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. And I promise you, if you tap into that source, you will never be the same again. Let's talk now about what discovering real strength truly looks like. The first thing I want us to understand, something I wish I had learned sooner, is that genuine strength often begins with brokenness. That sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? How can you be strong if you're broken? But let me tell you a story from my own life. Early in my career, I was fortunate to land roles that brought me recognition, awards, and financial stability. From the outside, people might have thought, this guy has it all together. But no one saw the inner turmoil I was wrestling with. The doubt, the fear of failure, the longing to please everyone around me. I felt like I had to maintain a persona of unshakable confidence. And let me tell you something, that's exhausting. When you're constantly trying to appear invincible, you never allow yourself to admit, I need help, I need guidance, I can't do this by myself. And sooner or later that facade cracks. In my case, it cracked when a personal failure collided with a professional setback. It felt like a wave I couldn't outrun. I tried to hold it together with my usual willpower, but it wasn't enough. I found myself in prayer, tears rolling down my face, admitting that I was at the end of my rope, that I didn't know what to do anymore. And in that moment of raw vulnerability, I sensed God's presence more powerfully than I ever had before. I stopped trying to fight it on my own and allowed myself to be broken. That's when I discovered a deeper well of courage, because acknowledging your weakness opens the door for God's strength to flow in. It's like clearing the debris from a stream so the water can run freely. God's faithful care had been available all along, but my pride and self-reliance were blocking the flow. I want to speak to the young people for a moment. When you're growing up, you're taught to project confidence, to keep your chin up, to act like you've got it all figured out. It might look like strutting down the school hallway, or dominating on social media, or trying to be the funniest, the smartest, the most popular. But deep down, there can be a lot of insecurity, especially in this age of instant comparison, where everyone's life looks perfect on the outside. It's easy to let your self-worth get wrapped up in how many likes you get, or who's paying attention to you. The message I want you to hear is this: you don't have to have it all together. You don't have to be superhuman, and you don't have to face your battles alone. Real strength often comes from admitting, I don't have all the answers. I need guidance. That's why turning to God is so transformative. It's not about religion as a collection of rules. It's about relationship. When you cry out for help, you're entering into a dialogue with the one who knows your name, who loves you beyond measure, who created your very heart. And I can't think of a safer place to be vulnerable. The world might judge you, your classmates might judge you, but God sees you, understands you, and wants to walk with you every step of the way. Now let me talk to the parents out there. If you have children, whether they're still in diapers or about to graduate from college, you know the weight of that responsibility. You want them to be healthy, happy, protected, successful. But sometimes, no matter how much you give, you feel like it's not enough. You worry about finances. You worry about their futures. You might feel guilty if you're not able to provide the same things you see other parents providing. Or maybe you're dealing with a child who's struggling academically, socially, or emotionally, and you blame yourself. Could I have done more? Did I miss something? Let me share a lesson I learned. My wife and I found that, as parents, our biggest breakthrough moments often came when we stopped trying to control every outcome and started praying, Lord, guide us. Show us how to love these children the way you love them. Show us how to raise them in a way that honors you. When we released that need to be the perfect mother or father and gave it over to God, we felt a tremendous sense of peace. We realized that, yes, we have responsibilities and we must do our part. But ultimately, these children are gifts from God entrusted to us. Depending on His faithful care doesn't mean you stop taking action. It means you trust that His wisdom is greater than your own. And that trust brings a calm, an assurance that you're not carrying the weight of parenthood alone. Likewise, in the business world, the pressure can be immense. You might be a CEO or an entrepreneur who's built something from the ground up. You've risked your finances, your time, your reputation. You've set lofty goals, and maybe for a while, everything was booming. Then the market shifts, your revenues drop, and suddenly you're teetering on the edge. You scramble, you strategize, you lose sleep, all the while thinking, if I just find the right angle, if I just work a little harder, I can save this company. I want to challenge you to pause for a moment. Ask yourself if your own skill set, as impressive as it may be, is sufficient to navigate the storms that come your way. Because sometimes God uses those storms to remind us that we're not the ones ultimately in control. I've been there, worried sick about the next move, trying to micromanage every detail, and feeling my stress level climb higher and higher. The turning point came when I got on my knees and said, God, you gave me these opportunities in the first place. You opened the doors. You gave me these talents. Help me to use them in a way that's aligned with your purpose. Direct my decisions. I can't do this on my own. Once I humbled myself, I found renewed creativity, clearer insight, and sometimes miraculous solutions I never would have devised on my own. Because depending on God doesn't stifle your ambition. It refines it, channels it in a way that's life-giving rather than soul-crushing. You see, the common theme here, whether we're talking about youth struggles, family issues, or professional hurdles, is that our personal strength has its limits. We might be mighty in our own eyes until a real crisis hits, and then we find ourselves searching for an anchor. That anchor is the faithful care of God, who never takes His eyes off you, never forgets your name, and never grows weird. But there's a crucial next step. We have to let Him in. It's one thing to talk about faith, to carry a Bible, or to say a prayer before a meal. It's another thing entirely to live in daily dependence on God. And I mean daily, moment by moment, conversation by conversation, decision by decision. God's care is not a spare tire you pull out when you have a flat. It's the engine that powers the entire car. That's why an intimate relationship with Him matters so profoundly. It's not a quick fix, it's a posture of the heart. Now, how do we foster this intimate dependence practically? Well, first, we need to prioritize time to be still and connect. In a world that's always scrolling, always rushing, it takes a conscious choice to hit the pause button and say, God, I'm here. I'm listening. That might be 15 minutes in the morning, reading scripture, or simply sitting quietly in prayer, asking God to guide your day. It might be a walk in nature where you let your thoughts settle and open your heart. It might be journaling your fears, hopes, and gratitude. The point is, you've got to carve out that sacred space. Too many of us treat our spiritual lives like a leftover we deal with after everything else is done. But real intimacy develops when you make God your first priority, not your last resort. Think of any close relationship you've ever had: a best friend, a spouse, a child, a mentor. That bond was strengthened by consistent time and honest communication. The same principle applies to your relationship with God. You can't expect to hear His guiding voice if you never slow down enough to listen. Second, we need to be honest with ourselves and with God. If you're hurting, say so. If you're afraid, admit it. If you've messed up, confess it. There's incredible power in stripping away the pretense and letting God see the real you, though, of course, He already sees you fully. The transformation happens in your heart when you acknowledge, "Here I am, shortcomings and all," and trust that He loves you unconditionally anyway. Because you can't build genuine dependence on a facade. Let's be real. We all have our dark corners, our regrets, our wounds. Bringing them into the light is what allows God's healing power to do its work. Pretending everything is fine might preserve your image in front of people, but it does nothing to heal your soul. It's in vulnerability that we find freedom and growth. Third, act on what you sense God leading you to do. Faith isn't passive. It's not just hoping God does something. It's stepping forward, often in ways that feel scary or uncomfortable, trusting that He'll meet you there. That might look like forgiving someone who hurt you deeply, even though every instinct in you wants to hold on to anger. It might look like turning down a business deal that conflicts with your values, even though it promises a big payout. It might look like reaching out to mend a relationship you let fall apart, or offering help to someone in need, even when you're not sure you have the bandwidth. When you act in obedience, even if your knees are trembling, you're declaring that you trust God's plan more than your own instinct. And that is the doorway to discovering a power beyond your imagination. Every time you step out in faith, you're building spiritual muscle, the kind of muscle that can withstand life's heaviest hits. But not ignore the reality of struggle. Depending on God doesn't mean you won't have seasons of pain, confusion, or darkness. In fact, sometimes it may seem like the storms intensify right when you decide to trust Him more fully. You might lose relationships that were never meant to be permanent. You might face tests of character that challenge you at your core. You might confront spiritual battles that you never anticipated. I wish I could tell you trusting in God means your path will always be smooth, but that wouldn't be honest. What I can tell you is that you will never face those storms alone. And in those storms, you'll discover aspects of God's faithfulness you never would have known otherwise. Because it's one thing to hear about peace that passes understanding. It's another thing to feel it wash over you in the middle of heartbreak. It's one thing to read about God providing for your needs. It's another thing to see doors open in ways you never could have orchestrated yourself. Let me share another personal story. There was a time I felt called to use whatever platform I had to share my faith more openly. But the entertainment industry can be tricky. There's always that voice in the back of your mind saying, "Don't rock the boat, keep it vague and safe. You don't want to alienate anyone." And part of me was tempted to do just that. Play it safe. Talk about God in a generic sense, not get too personal. But I felt this conviction stirring in me. Denzel, your story belongs to me. Your talents belong to me. And I gave them to you so you could serve a greater purpose. I knew in my heart that a sanitized, watered-down testimony was not what God was asking of me. So, trembling a bit, I stepped out. I began speaking more openly about the role of faith in my life. And sure enough, some folks applauded, some folks questioned it, and some folks criticized. But I felt a sense of peace, a deep assurance that I was walking in alignment with God's calling. Over time, I found new doors opening, new opportunities to impact people beyond just entertainment. I saw lives change, not because of me, but because God was using my willingness to be honest. My point is, if you feel called to something that honors God, whether it's in your workplace, your family, your community, don't be afraid to step out. Yes, you might face pushback. Yes, you might lose some favors or invitations, but the strength you gain from obeying God's nudges will far outweigh the comfort of staying in your safe zone. One of the most common struggles people share with me is the fear that they're not qualified, not good enough, not spiritual enough to lean on God. And I get it. We're bombarded with messages that say success belongs to those who are the smartest, the richest, the prettiest, the toughest. But remember this, in almost every story we see in Scripture, God uses people who feel unqualified. Think of David, a shepherd boy who faced a giant. Think about Moses, a stuttering man who led a nation to freedom. Think about Mary, a teenage girl chosen for an unimaginable destiny. These individuals didn't come with perfect resumes. What they had was a willingness to say, "Yes, Lord, use me." That's the heart of dependence, saying, "I might not have it all, but I surrender to the one who does." It's never been about you being perfect. It's about you being open. And when you embrace that truth, something shifts inside you. The same ordinary task, going to work, taking care of your family, pursuing your hobbies, become channels for God's extraordinary power. I also want us to consider how this affects our community. When we each learn to lean on God, something beautiful happens collectively. Our families become more peaceful. Our workplaces become more compassionate. Our neighborhoods become more supportive. Because instead of running on empty, trying to squeeze every bit of energy from our own limited reserves, we're tapping into an endless well of grace. We become more patient with each other because we've experienced God's patience with us. We become more forgiving because we've received forgiveness ourselves. We become more generous because we trust God will provide. That's the ripple effect of intimate dependence. It doesn't stay contained in your private life. It overflows to everyone around you. Imagine what would happen if each of us adopted that posture of dependence. Think about how many conflicts could be resolved, how many families could be healed, how many businesses could operate with integrity, how many young people could find real hope for their future. This isn't just a personal journey. It's a collective one. And we all have a role to play. Now, I want to address a specific doubt some of you might have. Maybe you've tried leaning on God before, and you feel like He didn't show up the way you hoped. Maybe you prayed for healing and the healing didn't come. Maybe you asked for a specific door to open and it stayed locked. Let me gently challenge you. Sometimes God answers in ways that don't match our expectation. Sometimes the healing is emotional, not physical. Sometimes the locked door is His protection, because He sees what's on the other side. In my own life, there were roles I desperately wanted, situations I prayed would work out a certain way, but they didn't. I was disappointed, even angry at God. But looking back, I can see how those closed doors led me to something far better, or how they shielded me from a path that would have harmed me. The more we mature in faith, the more we learn to trust that God's perspective is infinitely wider than ours. That doesn't mean it's easy. Loss is still painful. Disappointments are still real. But when you trust in God's faithful care, you don't interpret those disappointments as rejections of you. Instead, you learn to see them as redirections for your good. And that shift in perspective changes everything. Let's get down to practical solutions for navigating the tough seasons. Suppose you're facing a relational breakdown. A friend betrays you, a spouse leaves, or your child stops talking to you. First step, pray for guidance and clarity before you react. Our natural impulse is often to lash out, to sink into bitterness, or to isolate ourselves. But in that moment, pause. Say, "Lord, help me see this situation the way you see it. Help me respond in a way that honors you." Next step, reach out for godly counsel. Don't try to fix everything by yourself. Find a mentor, a pastor, a trustworthy friend who can pray with you, who can offer wisdom rooted in faith. Third step, practice consistent acts of love and humility, even if you feel the other person doesn't deserve it. That doesn't mean you let people walk all over you, but it does mean you operate from a posture of grace. Remember that your identity is secure in God. You don't need someone else's approval to validate your worth. When you lean on God, you realize that your capacity to love and forgive expands beyond what you thought possible. What about financial struggle? Many of us have been there, wondering how to pay the bills, feeling crushed by debt. It's a scary place. But depending on God starts with inviting Him into your finances. This isn't about some magical prosperity formula. It's about stewardship and trust. Ask Him for wisdom on how to handle money, how to budget, how to prioritize needs over wants. Sometimes He might convict you to scale back, to live more simply, so you can handle your responsibilities with integrity. Other times, He might lead you to a job opportunity or a side hustle you never considered. He might inspire you to ask for help or share resources with others in a way that creates a supportive community. My point is, when you put your finances into God's hands, it's not about expecting a lottery check from heaven. It's about recognizing that every resource you have is a blessing, and you are called to use it wisely. In that process, your anxiety can give way to a profound sense of peace. You realize that God cares about every detail of your life, including your bank account. Another common struggle is anxiety and mental health challenges. If you're in that place, know that you're not alone. It might be clinical depression or chronic worry that feels like it's strangling your joy. Don't be afraid to seek professional help. God can work through therapy, through medication, through the support of mental health professionals. Praying and leaning on God doesn't mean you avoid practical solutions. It means you integrate them with faith, asking God to guide you toward the right people, the right steps, the right healing process. There is absolutely no shame in acknowledging that you need help. In fact, it's a demonstration of wisdom. When you say, "I can't carry this burden alone," that's you exercising dependence on God. And sometimes, God's answer is sending you the right counselor or support group. And in that journey, you can discover a level of resilience and hope that's grounded in something eternal, not just in fleeting positivity or self-help slogans. Now let's talk about the emotional component of dependence. I've often heard people say, "I believe in God, but I don't feel close to Him." Maybe you've been there. You pray, but your prayers feel empty. You attend services, but you leave the same way you came. That can be discouraging. But intimacy is cultivated. When you're building a relationship with someone, it takes time, shared experiences, and authenticity. So, if you find yourself feeling distant from God, ask yourself, are you giving Him your time, or are you just squeezing Him in between other priorities? Are you being real in your prayers, or are you sticking to polite, rehearsed words you think you're supposed to say? Are you willing to listen in silence, or do you rush in with your wish list and then rush out? Another critical question, are you holding on to bitterness or unconfessed struggles that block your spiritual growth? Sometimes our own hearts become calloused. Acknowledging these issues can be the beginning of a closer walk with God, where you actually start to feel His presence and hear His voice in your daily life. There's something profound that happens when we experience God's love on a personal, tangible level. It changes how we see ourselves, how we see others, how we interpret circumstances. We stop feeling like victims of life's randomness and start recognizing the divine orchestration at work around us. No, it doesn't mean every day is a breeze. We still live in a broken world. But we learn to see beauty in the midst of chaos, hope in the midst of hardship, purpose in the midst of pain. That, my friends, is true strength. The ability to stand firm when the ground beneath you is shaking, because you're rooted in something unmovable. And let me tell you, it's a testimony that shines brighter than any sermon ever could. As I reflect on the different phases of my own life, childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, fatherhood, career highs and lows, I can see the hand of God weaving through every triumph and every trial. Even in the moments I strayed or doubted, God's faithfulness was unwavering. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that God never abandons his children. We might walk away, we might close our hearts, we might stop listening, but he's always there, waiting with open arms. That's the heart of a loving father. And once you grasp that truth at your core, that you are loved without condition by the Creator of all things, a new kind of confidence rises up. It's not arrogance. It's certainty that you matter, that your life has purpose, and that you are never alone. I want to emphasize the power of gratitude in this journey. When you begin to lean on God, don't just focus on what you need from him. Take time to thank him for what he's already done. There's something about a grateful heart that opens you up to receive even more. It might be as simple as thanking him for a new morning, for the roof over your head, for the breath in your lungs. Or it might be thanking him for the lesson you learned in a painful season. Gratitude shifts your perspective from scarcity to abundance, from fear to trust. And that attitude of thankfulness feeds right back into your dependence on God, because it reminds you of all the ways he has shown up in your past, giving you confidence that he will show up in your future. Let me also touch on community. Sometimes we treat our faith like a solitary endeavor, just me and God. But God designed us to be in community, to strengthen each other, to bear each other's burdens. If you don't have a community where you can share your struggles, pray together, and encourage one another, I urge you to seek one. It might be a local church, a small group, or even a couple of trusted friends who share your values. We grow faster in fellowship than in isolation. Being around other believers who are also learning to depend on God helps you stay accountable and reminds you that you're not walking this journey alone. One of the devil's greatest strategies is isolation, making you think you're the only one with doubts or fears, the only one struggling. Don't buy that lie. We're all works in progress, and we need each other's support to keep moving forward. As I look out at you all, I see stories in progress. I see young men and women on the cusp of discovering who they really are. I see parents juggling more than they ever thought they could handle. I see seasoned professionals questioning if they can maintain the pace. I see broken hearts yearning for healing, restless souls searching for direction. And I see so much potential that you might not even see in yourself yet. The beautiful truth is, God sees it. He's seen it all along, even when you were just a thought in your mother's womb. He orchestrated your gifts, your passions, your dreams, and he also knows your limitations, your triggers, your weaknesses. The invitation is for you to come to him, not as a last resort, but as your daily source of life. When you do that, you unlock a strength that surpasses all human wisdom or bravado. You start living from a place of overflow rather than emptiness. Now, as we draw closer to the end of our time together, I want to circle back to that original question. Where do you turn when life hits you hard? If you leave here with nothing else, I hope you take this. Real strength isn't about never falling. It's about knowing who will catch you when you do. It's about being certain that when your own arms grow weak, there's a Father's hand sustaining you. That certainty is what fuels your ability to face challenges head-on, to pursue big dreams, to love deeply, and to stand firm when the wind howls. Because you know you're not in this alone. Look back at your life. Look at the times you thought you wouldn't make it. You're still here. Something or someone carried you through. Perhaps you've never acknowledged that it was God's hand all along. Perhaps you've given yourself all the credit or chalked it up to luck. I challenge you to look again, to see the deeper narrative, to recognize the presence of a faithful God who's been with you every step of the way. And then I challenge you to respond, to lean into that presence more consciously, more intimately than you ever have before. If you do, I guarantee you'll discover a peace that surpasses understanding, a courage that defies logic, and a joy that isn't determined by circumstances. One of the great joys of my own journey has been witnessing how God can transform what the world deems insignificant into something magnificent. If he can use a kid from Mount Vernon to stand on stages, to share stories that move people's hearts, to raise a family grounded in love and faith, he can certainly work wonders in your life, too. I'm no different than you at the core. I'm a child of God with flaws, fears, and questions. The difference is, over time, I've learned to surrender those fears to a loving Father whose wisdom dwarfs my own. And in that surrender, I found real strength. So I ask you now, are you ready for that kind of transformation? Are you ready to exchange your burden of self-reliance for the gentle yoke of God's guidance? Are you ready to let your broken pieces become the mosaic through which God's light shines brightest? There's a step of faith each of us needs to take. Maybe it's your first step, acknowledging you need God at all. Maybe it's your 10th step, surrendering a specific issue or relationship. Or maybe it's your 100th step, committing to serve in a new way, to share your story with others, to be a beacon of hope in a dark world. Wherever you are in your journey, God is ready to meet you there. And He's not just waiting to give you a boost or a pep talk. He's offering you a complete transformation from the inside out. That's what intimate dependence looks like. Now, let's summarize all we've walked through, but this time in the form of a final chart. We started by acknowledging that life has its storms, and that each of us hits a point where our own might fails. We explored the counterintuitive idea that real strength often starts with brokenness, because it's in surrender that we open ourselves to divine power. We talked about practical ways to cultivate intimacy with God, setting aside time, being brutally honest, stepping out in obedience, and embracing community. We addressed common struggles, parenting, finances, mental health, business challenges, and how leaning on God can bring clarity, direction, and peace. We recognize that dependence on God doesn't erase hardship, but it gives us the assurance that we never face those hardships alone. We acknowledge that God's answers don't always align with our expectations, yet His faithfulness remains constant. And we came to realize that gratitude and a humble, teachable spirit create fertile ground for growth in faith. At the heart of all this lies one simple truth. You are loved by a God who doesn't just sit on high, but desires to walk with you through every valley and every mountaintop. That's why we can be strong, not because we're invincible, but because we're supported by an invincible God. And when you truly live from that place of support, your life radiates hope and courage in a way that nothing else can replicate. So, here's my call to action for you. Don't let these words remain theoretical. Put them into practice. Maybe tonight, before you go to bed, find a quiet corner and speak to God plainly. Tell Him where you're struggling. Ask for His guidance. Maybe share an area of your life you've been holding back. And then, be still. Listen. Don't expect a thunderous voice from the sky, though it's possible, but more likely you'll sense a gentle nudge in your spirit, a whisper reminding you that you're not alone, that you have a purpose far greater than you can imagine. Then, tomorrow, do something that reflects that dependence. Take one small step of obedience, or forgiveness, or kindness, or generosity that you've been holding back on. Then watch how your perspective starts to shift. Pay attention to the peace that blossoms in your soul. Note how your stress might begin to melt away, replaced by a quiet confidence. That's not happenstance. That's the fruit of leaning on a God whose capacity to love you is infinite. And don't keep it to yourself. If you experience a breakthrough, share it. Encourage someone else. We're conduits of God's grace, not hoarders. The world needs more people who live boldly from a place of faith and compassion. By sharing your story, you might spark the same hunger in another soul. You might be the one God uses to help someone else discover real strength in Him. I want to leave you with a final image. Picture yourself standing in front of a towering wall, something that seems impassable. Maybe it's a financial crisis, a health scare, a broken relationship, or a dream you've delayed for too long. You can stand there, staring at the wall, trying to climb it or break it down with your own two hands, exhausted and discouraged. Or you can call upon the very one who designed the mountains and the seas, the one who can make a way where there seems to be no way. When you do that, you might find that the wall becomes a door, or that an unseen path appears, or that you're given the tools and energy to scale it more easily than you thought possible. That's the power of God's faithful care. It turns our impossibilities into testimonies of His glory. And in the process, we are transformed from fearful, weary individuals into courageous souls standing on a firm foundation of love and grace. So I urge you, my friends, step into that kind of light. Stop settling for the cheap imitation of strength that culture sells you, the one that crumbles under real pressure. Embrace the genuine, enduring, life-giving strength that comes when you intimately depend on the God who formed you in the first place. If you do, your life will serve as a powerful testimony that echoes far beyond these walls, inspiring others to seek that same source of hope and power. That's how we change our families, our communities, and ultimately our world, one heart at a time, one step of faith at a time. May you walk out of here with your head held high, not because you're relying on your own abilities, but because you trust in a God whose love never fails. May you find your burdens a little lighter because you've handed them over to the one who can carry them all. And may you wake each day with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that no matter what challenges come your way, you have a refuge, a guide, and a source of unwavering strength. That is my prayer for you. That is my hope for all of us. Let's stand together in that truth, and let's move forward with confidence, faith, and courage. God bless you, and thank you for sharing this moment with me.